H2A rule. There is a difference as to when the housing was built and constructed as to whether or not
That's right.
ETA's regulations, housing temporary labor camp regulations apply to that building or whether or not OSHA's do. And that actually goes back to a date
1980.
in 1980.
Yeah.
So if we have at our headquarters unit, when our livestock leave and our, after they lamb out, our herders go out with the herds, and then we bring other H2A workers in to move pipe and stuff, and we want to use the same housing, is that going to be an issue that livestock were in that area?
I don't think that if they've been moved out, no, it shouldn't be a problem then, if the livestock aren't present. And I'd have to double check. I thought OSHA had an opinion letter up on their website about part of this. If you get the question to Kelly, we can look at it a little bit more closely.
Did the person who talked to you about this give you any sense of consequence of this, or what became the outcome of this discussion?
She said that it would be something that we would be probably looking at in the future, and we were looking to, I had mentioned that we wanted to rebuild some of this housing, and if there's problems like this and we're not aware of them, and we build a house and invest a lot of money into something, and we can't use that housing for summertime workers that are working on the farm, H2A workers also, we can't have one for one and one for the other, and then 20 acres livestock free for
Right.
this.
No, I understand that predicament. Yes, and if you are going to build new housing, then yes, you do need to get familiar with the OSHA standards because it's going to apply to housing built after 1980.
That really doesn't give us a real incentive to improve the housing for these people when that type of stuff is.
So, there have been a couple of times over the past decade and a half of doing this where we've tried to take a run at changing the rules with that and run into so much resistance that we've basically not been able to progress at all to change the rules on that. And when I say run into resistance, I'm going to say we've run into resistance by both sides, both employer and the advocates.
Yeah.
So there is a way that a variance could be applied.
There is
in that?
OSHA does have a formal procedure for requesting a variance. They have that information posted on their website.
So when would all H2A is going to be subject to OSHA requirements?
No, we're not saying that. You were talking about constructing new housing. Any new housing built after 1980 is going to be subject to the OSHA
Yeah. There's a lot of farms
standards.
out there that have
Right, stationary
80-year-old
housing.
housing equipment, they're housing units that are fine. Still used today.
3 minutes.
Okay. Yes, sir.
I too want to thank you for coming on it. I'm impressed with your interest. I too want to thank you for coming on. I'm impressed with your your interest. Can you address the telephone problems? Almost all our herders have a satellite phone that they can call their wives, and they probably talk more to their wives every night than they do when they're home. But
Their own personal one? Their own personal one? Or the one you supply?
well,
I thought he was using his supply phone to call his wife all the time.
the problem is how do we? They don't need another phone. And I guess we are required to pay at least part of the expense of the very sophisticated phone. Can you address that a little bit? No regulations on telephones,
Yeah, I mean,
cell phones?
well, for purposes of our application, what I see, you're required by the reg to identify the device that the workers are going to use in order to communicate with someone in case of an emergency. And the method that in the case that you're in areas where it doesn't work, you have to also tell us how you communicate with the worker. That's what you have to express on the job. That job is for recruitment of domestic workers too, not just your 2A worker. So that requirement sits there, and you identify the device that you're going to offer to workers. There may be a U.S. worker, I'm just saying, might be one, that wants to do this work. You have to offer them that device. So what's written in the job order that I look at is not just for purposes of your 2A worker, but it's for the recruitment aspect that you have to do for U.S. workers. So that's why it's there, and you do have to provide it. I think the issue of whether or not you offer the device and the worker is voluntarily saying, I don't want to use it, I want to use my own phone, which is what it sounds like you're saying. Yeah, you're making an effort to supply the equipment, but the worker is saying, I appreciate it, but I can't, I don't need to use it because I got this one and it works really well.
And that cost would be his to bear? If he chooses to use a more sophisticated.
Ryan and I would like to take back and talk about it.
I've heard this one come up. We don't have an FAQ on it per se at all yet. Is something that's already happening though?
Well, everybody's got a cell phone.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but cell phone's different than a satellite phone. You said satellite phone in the beginning.
Yeah. It's a good question.
Thank you. Let's give these guys a round of applause for coming out here.
Can I ask Kelly one more quick question for a little clarification on, there's a lot of the bigger Western outfits that have 2 guys in a camp. Could you speak to that about if there are 2 beds in the camp, is that sufficient to house 2 guys in the camp longer than 3 days, or would you, didn't mean to do that to you.
I mean, so my response is that this regulation, as I recall, the whole separate sleeping facility issue, even under the old guidance, was a point of contention, gave the impression that you had to have a whole separate housing unit for the second herder. This regulation, actually by input from industry, clarifies what the separate sleeping facility requirement is, and it is a separate bed, cot, bunk, mattress in that unit. So you've got a pull-out bed, separate pull-out bed in the unit for the second worker. The question you'd ask yourself is, have I met the separate sleeping facility requirement? Right? It sounds to me like you have a separate sleeping facility.
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say, and I swear I'll get off the stage, is there are going to be instances where some of our state staff are going to say potentially something like on this sleeping facility in a housing unit that it might not be permissible or whatever. I'm perfectly happy with Kelly or the Western Range people raising the issue to us. We do have an ombudsman program. It's an email account into our office. It's on our website. They work right by me, so I see stuff that comes in from that email account if you're not a member of one of the associations. So if you're experiencing something that you think doesn't sound right because you're reading the reg one way and it says, geez, I'm supposed to have a separate bed, cot, bunk, mattress for this worker, I've got it, it's in here, it's the pullout, or it's the second bunk that's in the unit, I think I'm meeting this requirement, but the state's telling me I don't, I need some help. If you can't get in touch with our Chicago center at tlc.chicago, you can contact the Ombudsman program. They're actually in my office. So.
Thank you again. I promise I'll get off the stage, but I did want to take a minute to say thank you and congratulations. You guys all worked very hard to gather comments and submit information through the comment-making process. And as you've heard today, it made a difference, and these gentlemen were able to take that information and craft a rule that worked for us. So congratulations, and thank you for your time in doing that.